All right. If you guys are still with me, I just want to say thank you for following along and congratulations for getting this far. I know this is a very tedious and slow process, but I think the payoff is really worthwhile when you get a complete, clean, nice looking model like this that for the most part is accurate to the actual car. Right. I also want to mention that I have a Discord channel, so it's in my links. And if you'd like to get some feedback or show what you're working on, your progress on this project or other projects, like my house project, for example, or if you just want to tell me that there's better ways to do things, right? I'm just because I'm the one making the videos here doesn't mean I'm unwilling to learn new things. So if you have suggestions for better ways to do this or different ways to do this, I'd love to hear them from you. So join the Discord and let's see what you're working on. So with that said, we're going to continue on here, and it's time to start trying to cut this thing apart. Now, I've been looking at some reference images. I've got some more here. Let me bring my peer ref up here. And I'm looking at mainly the hatchback because that's an area that I didn't have a lot of reference images for to begin with. So I've been kind of studying this hatchback area a little bit. And I actually think I'm going to hold off on it and kind of do this whole area maybe towards the end. Or I'm going to cut that apart at the end, not towards the end of the car. But I just wanted to kind of talk about my mindset. And I'm looking at a lot of the details here. And there's actually a lot going on here and how this is cut apart. And if I plan on doing the interior, it's probably going to be worth my time and effort to go ahead and do like a lot of this interior stuff as well, this interior surfaces. So I'm probably going to cut this apart last and do some extra modeling and stuff in here. And for that reason, I'm just going to wait to do this back piece as well. It kind of looks like this is two separate pieces. So yeah, we're going to, even though this is actually both of these are a little bit different than this one, right? Where you have the whole back as a window. I think I like this one a little bit better, even though it's slightly different, right? This one goes a little bit higher up. But we'll figure that out when we get there, or this one here, or this one. So we're going to attempt to cut apart the hood first. That's what we're going to do first. And it's definitely not without its challenges. If I'm looking at my top view here, we can see that some of this is going to be fairly easy. We can just make some lines going down, but right around here where we get all these curved lines where our shapes kind of blend into each other, this is going to be the difficult area to cut apart because a lot of this is just a straight line. So we're going to have to, we're going to have to cut this down in a straight line, but we don't want to mess up our shape transitions and stuff. So it's going to be a little touch and go here when we're making these shapes. But let's go ahead and dive in and see if we can figure it out. I think the first thing I want to try is just slicing it, right? So let's grab my multi-cut tool. And somewhere around here, I'm just going to slice it right straight all the way down to where that seam is going to come through. This is going to make a lot of ugly geometry, but at least it'll give me like an establishing line that I can sort of abide by. And there's going to be a lot of stuff that I have to clean up here. But yeah, I think as far as steps go, I'm not really sure yet how I'm going to deal with this. But this is the first thing I'm going to try, right? And again, this goes back to, this can be kind of a scary thing to do, right? When you have all this geometry and just put a slice right through the middle of it, and it's going to, after all that time we spent cleaning up all of these ingons and getting really nice geometry, this is kind of a scary thing to do because you're creating a lot more work for yourself. It has the possibility of looking really ugly. You could mess things up with this, but you just do it, right? Don't be afraid to do it. Make the mistakes, make the wrong decisions, because those will eventually lead you to the right decision. You can't have the attitude where I'm only going to make correct choices, right? That's just not going to happen. You have to be willing to make bad choices too. You can save your file so you can always go back to a previous version. You can even duplicate your file or duplicate your model if you want to go back and kind of store a previous version of that. I know a lot of people that work that way, and maybe I'll just kind of show you what I mean by that. But don't be afraid to do something like this, right? So I'm just going to slice right down the center there. Not the center, but right down that edge. And let's see what we get, right? So what we're looking at here, this new line that I made, is this really ugly line. Again, you can't kind of be afraid to do this. And I just want to kind of look at it, right? I can always undo this. This is the line that we just created, going all the way down. And I think I want to add it. Let's look at a reference here. So let's look at kind of where that seam is falling. So it's kind of right beyond that curve. And it's also okay to move it around a little bit. You don't have to have it directly right on that point. If your model is a few centimeters off here and there, it's not a big deal. No one is going to come and attack you because your hood is 3 centimeters smaller than it is on the actual car, right? So if you need to move it around a little bit just to make life a little bit easier for you, that's completely fine. And I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to start this line here. So I'm just going to undo before I cut that line in. And I'm going to try to start it somewhere right around here where you have this curve transition and I have this line right here. So let's jump back into so I'm going to try to start this cut right around here and then go all the way up to maybe this point over here. Okay, so let's try to do that. And even if I want to move it over a little bit more, I'm going to have to split the seam apart, right? So that's fine as well. So let's try to cut it. I'm going to cut it, slice it right around here and go all the way up to maybe right around there. And that's going to be the first little part of our hood seam right there. So let's try to figure out some of this details. And I think for a lot of this, it's going to be a lot easier than you may think, because a lot of this transition from one shape to the other, we're going to now have the opportunity to kind of hide it, right? Because it's going to go, it's no longer going to be going from one shape to another because these are going to be two different objects now. So we can kind of try to hide this. And in fact, this might make it easier for you if we go ahead and separate this out, right? If we go ahead and extract this whole piece. So let's go ahead and do that. And that may help your brain to sort of wrap around all this mess here a little bit better. So let's jump back into our top view. And we're going to go to face mode. And I'm just going to try to select all those faces down that line that I just created. And I want to double check just in case I miss any little little spots. Like right there's a little spot that I missed, a little face that I missed. And so all the way down, I'm just going to make sure I get that line. And then let's just go ahead and separate this part of the hood. So I'm going to go to Edit Mesh, Extract, and we have two different pieces of geometry now. And I think this will just make life a little bit easier because we can sort of start wrapping our brains around this stuff a little bit better now, right? And a lot of this stuff, because this is just the hood the way that it is, we're probably not even going to need some of these lines coming up through here. So let's start just by getting rid of control deleting these two lines. And then I'm actually going to straighten this one. This one kind of curves in a little bit. Let's just go point A to point B and straighten this line out like that. And then again, we create the line we want. We control delete the line we don't want. Right, so that was actually a lot easier than you may have expected it to be. So not a big deal there. Now this is going to be probably a little bit more difficult. Probably not though, right? Because we just have these two lines, and then we maybe have some triangles here that we'll get a chance to deal with. I see a little part right there that I missed, right? Not a big deal. I can just grab this face here on that little thing that I missed there, delete it. And then for this one, I'm just going to use target weld. And I'm just going to weld this point over like that. And I don't want to necessarily get rid of this point because if we turn on our wireframe, we have a point that meets up with that. Oh, excuse me. I had to sneeze there. It took me a second to sneeze. But I don't want to necessarily, I probably will eventually delete that point. In fact, I may just target weld this one up to that point. But just for future reference, you may not want to just get rid of those points right off the bat because it may line up in a way where you don't want to get rid of it. But actually, I'm going to go ahead and we will delete it because I don't think it's really going to serve a big thing there. But just be careful about it, right? Think about it. I'm not saying delete it or don't delete it. I'm just saying think about it and decide for yourself if you need to delete that point or not. And then I think this one right here, we can just target weld this one up. And this will be a triangle, but I think that's okay. And, I think we've for the most part, if we grab this one and just weld that one up as well, I think we've solved all the problems, right? So it seems very intimidating at first, but just do it. Stop to think about it. And I think you'll be surprised at how quickly you can sort of figure those things out. Just try not to be like paralyzed by the fact that you don't know what to do. I don't know what to do either. Right. But again, this is where the confidence of an artist comes in, right? You're confident you can figure your way out of a box. And just try not to be too paralyzed by that fact. So this actually worked out very well. All the seams kind of, and I could probably, yeah, I think we'll stick with this for now. I think this will work out well for us. We can come in and let's just select them both and smooth them just to kind of take a look at them. Let's turn our wireframe off. And, it looks pretty good. Right, we still needed to make our seams. There's a little bit of a weirdness thing happening right there, but that's okay. Right, because there's going to be a gap in between these two anyway. So it's completely fine. Nothing wrong with that. Now let's decide about the gap, right? How big of a seam do we want this to be? I try to stay consistent with the types of seams that we have. So, for example, we have some like really tight seams and some fairly more bigger of a gap, right, in the seams. So like the seam around this headlight here is a pretty tight seam. But then the one around the hood and probably the one up here is going to be quite a bit more bigger, a larger of a gap. And the same with the doors. And probably the same with the hatchback as well. So when I'm creating those seams, I'm going to try to be a little consistent with how far apart those seams are. So I'm going to establish the first seam first, and then we'll try to measure all of our other seams based off of that first seam, and I'll show you how. This lady's really enjoying her smoothie. Okay, so let's see if we can just add in an edge loop, right? So you obviously don't want your seams to be too large because then you're going to like see through it, right? But I don't want them to be too small because then when we kind of add thickness and everything to our surfaces, that stuff may not look like there's a seam there, right? When we zoom out, we want there to be a black line there when we render this. So we need to find the right sort of thickness for a seam. So I think the ideal way to do this is just kind of zoom really closely in and try to figure out a similar distance here. Maybe something like this is probably going to be pretty good. And then we can just select this whole loop of edges. This might be even a little too much. And let's just delete that. I actually think that's pretty good. That's a pretty good looking seam. And eventually we're going to have thickness on all of this stuff. So for example, eventually we'll take like this whole line and we're going to extrude it in. I'm not going to do this yet, but just to kind of show you. Right, so eventually we're going to do something like that and then maybe even bevel this edge a little bit. So when we do smooth it, we'll get a very nice looking clean seam line going all the way down. Yeah, I still think if anything that's a little too large of a gap, so I'm just going to back up. So before I deleted that. And let's just make this a tiny bit tighter. So maybe something around there. And I'm actually just going to keep that line there because that will help with that curve over. I could always delete it later, so not a big deal. We'll grab this, and I did that just by selecting one of those faces, holding down Shift and double click, and it'll select the entire face ring, so or face loop, whatever you want to call it. I think it's face loop, and then we can just delete that face loop if we want. Right, so that's pretty good. That's a pretty good little seam. Now we have another seam that we need to create up here, and that's this one right here. And this one, I think what we're going to do is just draw a line. I'm going to draw this because our top view and our side views aren't quite lining up properly, right? So if I jump over to my side view, this stuff is a little bit forward. So I'm also going to move this seam right here a little bit forward as well. So we're going to grab our multi-cut tool And let's go to object mode, multi-cut, and maybe somewhere around here. I'm going to try to match this profile of this line, but I'm just going to do a little bit further down. And if you get this wrong, right? So if you do something like this, if you don't have a steady hand and you're creating something like this, don't worry about it. We can kind of refine it as we go. So I'm going to try to get it right in the first go. But if it's a little wrong, you can just kind of redo it if you need to. But again, nobody's going to be staring down over your shoulder telling you that's wrong. I think something like that's pretty good. And then to actually get our seam here, what we can do is we can bevel this edge. So now that we have this edge, if I go to, let's take a moment to talk about how bevel works first, because I think that's an important thing to discuss. If I create a cube, and let's add a division to this cube, and then let's just grab this corner right here and do a bevel. Right, you have this fraction. Now this fraction is basically the fraction of your smallest face on that corner, right? So what this fraction is looking at, or what this fraction is sort of representing, is the distance between the edge that you're beveling and the next edge on the smallest face of that corner. So this, right, we have two faces on this corner. This is the smallest face on that corner. So if I bevel this edge at a value of 0.5, my bevel is going to go right down the middle of that smallest face. At a value of 1, it's going to go all the way to the end, right? So, and so on. So if I bevel this and go all the way up to a value of 1 for my fraction, it's going to go all the way to that end. Right? So if you're beveling multiple edges, which we're about to do, for example, if we make another cut here, and I'm beveling multiple edges here, right, that fraction is still only going to that. It's a percentage of the smallest face, right? So even though we have plenty of room to can extend this bevel all the way to this edge, it's only going to the smallest. It's only looking at the smallest face on that selection. That's important because you need consistency when you're beveling multiple edges at once. We don't want them all to be differently beveled, right? We want to have a consistent line beveled throughout. So just make a mental note of that. And so when you're beveling multiple faces, right? So if you have something, let's just show you another little quick example, right? So say we have something like this, and I want to bevel this entire top corner, right? But say I have like a little tiny issue that I'm not aware of. Like say I have like a little edge that goes right here. Right, so I have something like that, and I'm not aware of it, and I just have my model, and I want to bevel this. So I'm going to go around and select all of those edges, and then we're going to click bevel. And my fraction isn't going very far in, right? And that's because, again, it's looking at that smallest face, right? And because of that little issue that I have right there, that's the smallest face. So if you're ever trying to bevel something and it's not beveling as wide as you want it to bevel, this is why, because you have a little tiny face somewhere in that selection, and this fraction is only going up to your smallest face. And you can't, I don't believe you can increase this above, oh, you can increase it above 1. That's interesting. But it really gives you messed up geometry at that point. But that's interesting to know. It can go above a value of 1. All right, so that explanation's out of the way. What I'm going to do here, and I'm going to do this in my perspective view because this will give me an idea. I'm looking at this distance here, this gap, and I'm going to try to get that same gap here. So we're going to select this. We're going to do a bevel, and I'm going to try to dial it in to the same distance, right? So right now we have a fraction of 0.1 and it's still too large. So let's try 0.05. That's pretty close. I think it's a little bit smaller. Let's try 0.04. And I think that's pretty close to that bevel that we want. So then we can just grab that face ring or that face loop and delete it. And now we have our panels cut apart. Now, eventually at some point, I'm going to need to add these vents. And the benefit of cutting this apart now is now I can, if I need to, I can subdivide. Let me separate these things out. So we're going to go to Mesh, Separate. So now these are 2 different objects. But now I can subdivide this piece a lot more, right? So I can go to my smooth function and we can like subdivide the crap out of this if we need to, but it's still gonna look like it perfectly matches the other piece because we initially made it out of one piece. So those forms and those shapes and everything are gonna flow into each other. So, but we're going to need to subdivide this piece a lot more to add those vents in there. But for now, let's just back up and put that back the way it was. And that is our first cutout, right? And again, we're going to add a little bit of a thickness to everything eventually, but this is what we're going to start with. Now, what you can do, because next we're going to cut our doors apart. And I'm actually going to save this section here for a little bit later. Maybe after we get this fleshed out a little bit more. But I want to try to get the same size seam here for our doors. So I'm just going to make a little tiny sphere. And let's try to put this in position. This is just like I'm just using this as a measuring tool, right? So let's just make a little tiny sphere. And then I'm going to scale it down to where it just fits into that seam. And again, it doesn't have to be 100% accurate down to a hair level, right? Millimeter level. But now I can just use that little seam or that little sphere when I make my door seams, right? To kind of get an accurate or an equal sort of seam there between the two of them. Okay, so let's jump into our side view. Luckily, our side view here, we already kind of have that cut out. Let's take that little sphere that I created and let's move this over here, just around this area. There's a little bit of a weird line right there in our reference. Let me take a look at my photographic reference. Okay, so that's not a big deal. It looks pretty smooth and straight here, so I'm not going to worry myself too much about that. Yeah, that looks like a pretty clean line. Okay, so let's do the same. Well, okay, so we have another little issue here. Let's see if I can find what I'm talking about here in my reference. It might not be something that's super visible. So we have an interesting thing happening down here that you can barely see. Let's see if we can get a good look of it here. So you have a few like interesting little door panels right here happening. Let's see if we can. Trying to get a good view of this to show you kind of what I'm talking about. Okay, here we go. So this is kind of a good view of what we're trying to achieve. So we have this front door seam that comes all the way down to the bottom of the car, right? And then we have this seam that comes to here, right? And stops. And then we have this seam coming this way. So what this is telling me is there's a specific order that I need to create these seams in, right? I don't want to just create the seam here and have this go all the way down to the bottom, because it doesn't go all the way down to the bottom. What I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to create this seam first, and this seam, and then this seam, right? So again, this has everything to do with just like analyzing your model, analyzing your reference, and figuring out like an order of operations to do things in, right? So we need to start with this seam right here. And this one's pretty well lined up, except when we get right around here, we have this, we look at this in our perspective view, we have this curve that kind of jumps up this way and then jumps up back. And I think we just want to get like a smooth transition here, a smooth line coming through here. So let's try to establish that. Probably somewhere right around here. And then I want that to very smoothly transition over to this surface. So something like that, right? And again, that makes messy geometry, but we can fix it, right? So I'm just going to delete that curve. And then I'm just going to target weld this one over. Like that. And let's take a look at this from our side view. That's a little bit smoother. I think we can probably make it a little bit better, even still from the side view. So let's take it and go just kind of straight down. All right, that's going to be our seam. Let's control delete this. And I think I may actually want to just leave this and maybe even make another edge loop. I don't like the way this one's kind of angling out, so let's try to soften that transition a little bit. Right, you may look at this and say, wow, you're being really tedious with this stuff. You kind of have to be, right? Let's make another edge loop here. And I'm just going to weld this little point over something like this. If you want good results, if you want smooth surfaces, tedium is kind of the name of the game, right? If you're modeling something more organic, then you have a little bit more freedom. But yeah, if you want smooth surfaces, tedium. You got to be tedious about it. Attention to detail, right? All right, so I think we have a nice line established there for our door seam. Let's look at our side view one more time. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Let's take our sphere. Where did our sphere go? And let's move this over here. where that door seam is going to be. Just put it like right in there. And then I'm going to add in another little edge loop just like that. That way we can stay consistent, for the most part, consistent with our seam size. And then we can select that face loop and delete it. Let's back out. Let's take a look at our model. Let's smooth everything and just kind of take a look. All of our transitions and everything still look very nice. That seam looks pretty good. Right, that looks pretty good. Now the next seam is going to be super easy, right? Even though it's not really on our side reference, it's somewhere around it's below this seam, right? So we have this main seam, and then we have this one right here. So it's actually below this one. So I think our whole car body should extend down a little bit further, I think. Let's look at some of our other reference images. Yeah, so I think for this one, there's probably like a plastic piece right there. But if I'm looking at a lot of the stuff, that seam is a little bit further down. So I think what I'm going to do first is let's go into edge mode and let's select just this edge. If this wants to grab more, right? Because we already cut that seam. So let's just back up before we actually deleted that interior part there. So I'm just going to undo, right, until we're back to this part. Let's grab this whole bottom part here, and I'm just going to extrude the whole thing down. And we'll scale this in a little bit. And then if I'm looking at my perspective view, I think this is going to go in like that. Curve in quite a bit. And then let's just adjust these two guys. Vertex mode. So let's just adjust these over like that a bit. Right, and now this is going to be a super easy seam for us to make because we can just add in an edge loop down here somewhere. Let's grab our sphere. So we make sure we get a consistent line. Now for this one, right, that seam stops right there where that door seam is. So I'm going to delete this face ring or face loop first. And then we'll establish our seam that goes all the way through the bottom like this. And again, let's just try to get it close. We don't have to be right on the money with it. Right? And then we'll cut that all the way back to the edge, to the end there. In fact, before I do that, I'm gonna clean this part up a little bit and have it just go straight down like that. And then we can delete to make that seam. And then for this one's super easy. Let's grab our little sphere. Place this somewhere around here. and object mode, multi-cut, and we'll make another seam right there. So that little sphere is just helping me get consistently sized seams for everything. All right, so for the most part now we have everything kind of sliced up into different pieces, right? And combining and separating things out is something that we do quite a bit for this project. So I'm going to show you a little trick to get your duplicate over. So it will update even though you have multiple pieces. So for example, if we were to grab everything here and separate it out so it's all different pieces. So separate. Oops, let's select it first. Mesh separate. Right, so now we have all of these guys are individual pieces, right? Now to get our instance over to the side, this is kind of a pain in the butt because we're going to need to instance each piece of geometry, right? Now we could combine it back together, mesh combine, and then instance this back over, right? Something like this. The problem with that is that we're still going to be sort of cutting things up, and especially back here, we're going to be cutting things up more still. So I kind of want to keep everything separate for now. So I'm going to show you a way to instance over a group of objects instead of just individual objects. So let's start by selecting everything. Let's freeze our transforms, delete history on just everything, right? We're going to go to mesh separate. So that's going to separate everything out into individual pieces, and that will also put it in a group. Let's take a look at our groups here. So we have this group right here that it's an empty group, so I think we can just delete that. And then we have this group which has everything in it, right? Including, I think, the little sphere that we made somewhere. Yeah, it's in here still. So that little sphere's in there somewhere. There it is. Let's take that out and let's just call this seam sphere or seam gap so we can keep track of that. And let's just put this up here somewhere. So I'm going to select this entire group. We're going to delete history. And in fact, I'm gonna take everything out of this group. So I'm just going to select everything and middle mouse drag that out of that group. Once again, select everything and delete history on it. That should make that empty group node go away. And then check this out. I'm going to select them all again. I know, why did you delete that group if you're just going to put it back in another group? Why couldn't you use that group? Little shortcut, right? You're eventually going to learn like little tiny things like this that you can do to just save you a little bit of time. So if I grab everything now and put it in a new group, Control G, that new group is going to have its origin or its pivot point in the center of the grid. So let's just name this this whole group, Ford Pinto, right? And now I can instance that entire group, right? So instead of just instancing those individual objects, I'm going to instance that entire group. And that because its pivot point by default is in the center, it's just going to mirror over perfectly. So Control Shift D, right? So now I still have individual objects that I can select and manipulate, but I can move them around, I can edit them, and they're all still individual. So that's how you can mirror over a group of objects instead of just one. And then occasionally you're going to do something like cut it up again. And then in those cases, what what I would recommend doing is just you have this Ford Pinto 1, which is your instance group. You can periodically just delete it and then remake it, right? If you do anything that changes from one side to the other, you can just delete that group and instance it over again. All right, so we have all this stuff separated out pretty good now. The next thing I want to work on here in the next video is the hatchback. So we're going to kind of dive in and deal with all this stuff and get a really nice looking rear end. The front of our car is looking really nice and cool. Let's put some time and effort into the rear of the car next.